Stay my blade from the flesh of the innocent. Hide in plain sight. Never compromise the Assassin Brotherhood.
What if there was a secret, hidden Assassin's Creed game that you never knew about? In this video, I attempt to connect the dots of an unused plot that Ubisoft was building up over 4 separate games. This is set to be a very long video, so do what I do. Grab dinner, grab a snack. Don't try to watch it all in one sitting, watch it in parts. Any which way you decide to do it, I hope you guys do enjoy this video. I don't care what anyone says, I've always been a huge fan of Assassin's Creed. I mean, allowing players to relive historical moments through the context of a video game seems like the perfect idea. There's literally an endless amount of eras you could pick to serve as the backdrop for a game. That's why it really comes as a surprise that Ubisoft has managed to fumble this series over and over again, at least in the more recent years. Though some people may argue that they've been doing it the entire time. For me, the last Assassin's Creed game I ever played was Valhalla. When it was announced, I had to convince myself over and over again not to indulge after the massive disappointment I had with Assassin's Creed Odyssey. But still, that premise of Assassin's Creed always manages to draw me in. I'm just a nerd for history, bro. And it did seem like Valhalla was moving in the right steps. First, a return to the traditional conflict of Assassins versus Templars. Second, it was set in the early medieval era of England, wandering in the echoes of the lost Roman Empire, and it was smack dab in the Viking Age. So you're telling me we got a Viking assassin? Count me I remember specifically being disappointed when I first visited London within Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Of course, at that point in history, London was really just a Roman ruin. So I didn't really expect much in the visual aspect. It was at that point in the game though that all the excitement of new Assassin's Creed wore off. The facade faltered, and then I just plainly saw the gameplay cycle of Valhalla. Literally all you do in that game, is go somewhere, do a bunch of quests for people, and Eivor learns absolutely nothing, bro. That guy spent our whole entire game confused as fuck, bro. We don't really get any type of character growth into a wise figure that we do with all of our other Assassin's Creed protagonists. Eivor just really sucks. In the game's version of London, I remember specifically wanting to see the historical River Thames. In real life, it's quite an impressive river despite its murky, diseased waters. It's wide and lengthy, coiling through England much like a snake. However, in the game, you can barely fit Eivor's longship through it. Okay, that's probably a lie, but I'm not gonna go and check, mate. Obviously, they couldn't have a one-to-one recreation of England, otherwise the map wouldn't be as big as it was. But in comparison, I remember playing Assassin's Creed Origins for the first time. As soon as Giza opened up to me, I made a rush for those pyramids. And when they came into view, I was astounded to behold their majesty. It was genuinely something truly impressive. In that game, Egypt had also been downscaled heavily. So why is it that it did not detract from the game's landmarks? Perhaps it's because England barely had any landmarks at that point in time. I mean, to be very honest, in-game it barely has much of anything at all. It might just be that Egypt is more impressive than England, which is probably why they stole all their artifacts. All of this thinking got me thinking, what would I really want from an Assassin's Creed game? What is to be considered a good Assassin's Creed game? And here today, I plan to answer these questions and provide for you an outline on my perfect Assassin's Creed game. And the answer might be shocking. Ubisoft had their perfect Assassin's Creed game in their hands the whole entire time. No, it isn't a continuation of Desmond's storyline, scrapping the events of Assassin's Creed 3. It was on their end a lack of bravery to follow on from the plans they laid out that most likely prevented this ideal game from coming out. Without any further ado, let's get into this. But before we do, Reminder to like and subscribe. The way I've structured this video, right, I want to dive deeply into constructing a story that would make sense for an Assassin's Creed game that works on advancing the series rather than being a standalone adventure. At the same time, I would like to describe how the story weaves into the gameplay. At its essence though, it must remain an Assassin's Creed game. I don't want to add elements that would be unnatural for an Assassin's Creed game. So if I break this law within this video, feel free to let me know. To put it very simply, my idea is a sequel to Assassin's Creed Unity. Okay, wait. I know this is like a staple of the community. Unity deserved a sequel, but not gonna lie, people are actually right, and I'll give you the reasons. I'm gonna explain to you why Assassin's Creed Unity may have been building up to a sequel that would have produced one of the most fantastic Assassin's Creed games, at least in terms of the story. It all begins back with Assassin's Creed 3. They kill off their protagonist Desmond Miles, and thus much of the storyline that they had built over the 5 games, I think. They also proceed to finish much of the modern day conflict within the comics. After this point, Assassin's Creed didn't seem like it had an overarching storyline at all. The games were aimless, taking place within the same universe but all within their own reserved bubble. But what if I told you this was wrong? Well, sorry, my fault, I don't know why. What if I told you it did have a story building and that Assassin's Creed 3 was in fact the 4th game in this new series? We begin with Assassin's Creed 4, Black Flag. Edward Kenway suffers from his life as a pirate and abandons his ideals, transforming over the course of the game into a prolific member of the Assassins. Soon, he takes his newfound philosophy with him to England. There he has a child, Haytham Kenway. Haytham is groomed and manipulated by one of his father's associates. Soon after, Edward is assassinated and his son Haytham is inducted into the Templar Order. Haytham quickly rises through the ranks of the Templar Order and begins his search for Piece of Eden artifacts. This brings him into conflict with the Brotherhood of Assassins in the colonies. This begins Assassin's Creed Rogue, in which Shay Patrick Cormac finds himself reeling from the revelation that the creed he swore himself to may not at all be fighting for a good cause. This game is particularly interesting as it presents the idea that the conflict between the Assassins and Templars is not as black and white as we think it is. Typically within the games, it is the Assassins who represent peace and Templars who represent order. Templars want the mythical pieces of Eden in order to control and subjugate the population. Assassins just want to free the population. However, do Assassins really represent freedom, or rather chaos? As Rogue shows us, freedom can sometimes lead to chaos. As the Assassins work to keep the pieces of Eden out of Templar hands, they meddle with ancient technologies they have no understanding of, and they set off an earthquake that levels a Portuguese city. Much like the ethos of the Assassin's Order, Shay must free himself from the brainwashing and join the Templars, who actually help him in his mission to preserve these sites of Eden artifacts. Sometimes order is good, it prevents chaos. A balance is necessary. One side cannot prevail too much over the other. However, Shay has transformed into a Templar. He's joined the ranks of historical figures such as Rodrigo Borgia or even his son Cesare, true-born villains of the series. In the end, Shay and Haytham decimate the colonial brotherhood. His mission is done. He's protected the Eden artifacts as he set out to do, but he can no longer go back to his life as an assassin. Now he must continue on as a Templar, and so his next mission takes him to France. The next game in the series would of course be Assassin's Creed 3. After the decimation of the colonial brotherhood, a new hope rises in Radon Hagedon, or Connor Kenway, the grandson of the legendary pirate assassin Edward Kenway, and thus the son of Templar Grand Master Haytham Kenway. I mean, surely you should already be seeing how cool this is. The series has kind of transformed into this familial conflict like something out of Star Wars. Anyway, throughout the game, Connor restores the Brotherhood, honoring the disgraced mentor Achilles and freeing the Americas from Templar influence. As I said before, too much of one side leads to an imbalance that needs perfection. After this, we can assume that Connor takes on the position as the mentor of the Colonial Brotherhood. This brings us to the last game in the series, Assassin's Creed Unity. How does this game connect to anything of the familial drama that we had from AC4 to 3? Well, remember Shay's mission to France? Well, he goes there to collect another artifact, one that he had before but lost possession of. In La France, he encounters another assassin, Charles Dorian, who also happens to be his target. He quickly dispatches Charles, but in the old assassin's final moments, they manage to have a very interesting conversation.
Just finishing old business.
Old Connor and his assassins. The American Revolution undid your Templar business.
And perhaps we shall start a revolution of our own.
Of course, the Connor referred to here is our Connor from AC3. Everything we did in that game worked to undermine Shay's efforts in Assassin's Creed Rogue. Achilles' brotherhood was restored under Connor Kenway. It also helps that he killed his dad, who was the Templar Grand Master. Connor also fought in the American Revolution and worked to free the colonies from Templar control. The American Revolution could then be characterized as an assassin's revolution of some sorts. What's interesting here is that Shay makes reference to this by stating it's time for them to have a revolution of their own. Them could refer to the Templars, or it could just refer to the place they're in, France. As history follows, partly inspired by the revolution in the American colonies, the French are the next to revolt in the infamous French Revolution. Perhaps Shay meant both the Templars and the French. It is a very Templar-coded thing to play both sides to destabilize a nation for their own benefit. After this, we don't really know who the Templar Grand Master was, and by Shay's wording, it seems very likely that he was the one entrusted with the role after the death of Charles Lee. Or he could just be trolling Charles Dorian in his final moments and no longer be involved with the Templars at all. In any case, this sets up Unity directly, which is the game to take place within the French Revolution. We don't see anything of Shay or much of anything at all which involves the Templars in the French Revolution. The colonial Templars, by the way, the Templars of the American right. But we do get one thing: Arno Dorian, the son of Charles, the assassin who Shay murdered. It's very clear within Unity that his father's assassination still disturbs him. He's aware that his father was an assassin and was killed. In a dream sequence, we're actively chasing a shadow of his father's assassin, the shadow revealing itself to be Arno himself. Oh my god. He has no idea who killed his father, so the frustration of that must translate into self-loathing. What's also very interesting is how much of Unity parallels Rogue. It's not the typical Assassin's Creed plot. Arno, much like Shay, struggles with the ideals described by the Assassin's Order. Much of this internal conflict may originate from the fact that he was not raised as a traditional assassin. He has no idea of their existence until he matures into an adult. It's like Ezio, who spent much of his early life sheltered from the secret that his father was in fact a legendary Florentine assassin. When he matured into an adult and learnt of the Order, it was very easy for him to slip into that role of an assassin. Take someone like Arno, however, he's unknowingly very ingrained in Templar society. After the death of his father, he was taken in by a man who raised him alongside his daughter. And then after the death of his new father figure, this guy cannot catch a break. He's inducted into the Assassin's Order, by which he learns that his adoptive father was in fact a Templar of the French Rite. So when Arno matures into an adult and learns of the Order, he struggles to slip into the role of an assassin as he was raised unknowingly as a Templar. His morals are tested further when Elise, the girl he grew up alongside, reveals herself to be a Templar as well. Much like the colonial brotherhood of Shay's time, the French Brotherhood isn't full of any figures like Altair or Ezio. It's riddled with traitors and fools alike. While it isn't one of the best stories in the series, at its base elements we can pull very interesting ideas. It again describes the Templar assassins' conflict as not entirely black or white, by having Arno, like Hatham before him, raised by Templars, but then pushing him into the Assassin's Order, an order which struggles to uphold its own creed. Like Shay, Arno rises to the occasion, following through on what he believes is right. Despite the advice from the French Brotherhood, he trusts Elise. He succeeds in foiling Germain and his plan, and then he secures the Peace of Eden and cements himself as a master assassin. There's definitely certain things here that could have been improved, but this isn't what this video is about. As you can see, Unity, despite having many connections to past games specifically within the Kenway saga, stays in its own bubble, and I think that's perfect. It serves as a good introduction to the character of Arno Dorian while leaving enough room for future stories. Because there is a lot you can do, as you have probably figured out by now with what they've set up. In this era of Assassin's Creed, they had 4 games taking place within the same century. This means characters and stories could easily overlap and connect. Assassin's Creed 3 ends in 1783, while Unity starts in 1789. Even earlier if you consider the flashback to AC Rogue. This means that Connor Kenway, unless he died or something, is still alive and running around. J. Patrick Cormac is also definitely alive. Connor still has to find out who was responsible for the decimation of the Colonial Brotherhood. Shay is still a high-ranking Templar and still devout in his mission to protect Eden artifacts. I mean, flippin' Aveline is running around in this period. And of course, we have Arno, who still has to resolve his trauma surrounding his father's death. I don't believe he too much cares who did it, but considering Shay's words, he was partly responsible for the French Revolution. If Arno learned of his existence, he would come for him. Unity also laid the foundations for a future conflict between Arno and Napoleon. In Unity, Arno and Napoleon develop a sort of friendship. In a very particular one of Arno's memories, Arno is stealing documents from the French king when he is intercepted by Napoleon, who is also looting the king. Napoleon finds a box, we see him open it, and it shrouds him in a golden light. At first you may think it is a piece of Eden. I did, and technically it is, but it's not the proper ones. Man, these things are kinda confusing, bro. He gets a key which in the DLC for Unity opens up a Isu temple, and within that there is a apple of Eden, yeah, that thing. Within the DLC, Arno manages to find the Apple of Eden first and ships it to Egypt, far away from the ambitions of Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, what happens after the French Revolution in real history? Well, one might say, the Napoleonic Wars, yay! Well, this is where Napoleon carves an empire out of Europe of Romanesque qualities. He even invades Egypt. Wait a second.
This must reach Al-Mualim in Cairo.
He invades Egypt? That's what I've been trying to say this entire time, bro. They literally had it all in their hands. So, the historical backdrop of our Unity sequel would be the Napoleonic Wars. How would this work in a game though? The wars take place over the entirety of Europe, Asia, and even parts of Africa. The newer installments of Assassin's Creed have opted for more open zones of roaming. However, I'd like to take it back to the classic days and lock the player to roam only in cities. It should be a more linear style of exploration. Of course, in cities and these kind of hub worlds, you can run around and do things. But realistically, it doesn't really make sense for someone like Arno to be running across the entirety of Europe. Do you know what I mean? There could be small areas of land surrounding the cities which the player could additionally explore by traversal on horseback or other means, but mainly keep it to cities. These would include but not be limited to Paris, Cairo and Rome. And then I would have further locations be included as set pieces that the player need not explore but can experience through missions such as Moscow or Waterloo in Belgium. To summarize, we've uncovered our main plotline for the sequel to Assassin's Creed Unity, a story that finally brings Arno and Shay into conflict, and then our secondary plotline, the historical one, Napoleon's conquest of Europe. Our main protagonists would thus continue as Arnaud Dorian, and our central villains of the plot being Shay Patrick Cormac and
Napoleon, I am Emperor.
Which, wow, look at the dynamics you can build between your protagonist and the villain. First of all, you have the classic revenge story of, "You've killed my father, prepare to die." In Unity, Arno was not seen to be concerned with the identity of his father's killer, but he did have unresolved feelings about his father's death. At the end of the game, he seemed solidified in his position as a master assassin, calm, composed, content, stoic, I would say. Arno's whole philosophy is that you shouldn't chase your own ambitions, because in Unity, he was chasing his own ambitions and it led to Elise dying. But with the introduction of Shay, this may shake his new foundation to the very core. It could very much test his ideals. Would he be able to properly stay his blade? On the other hand, Napoleon and Arno have established friendship, kind of. And suddenly within the DLC, Arno is actively avoiding Napoleon. Their relationship is seemingly now strained. It seems to me that Arno began to distrust Napoleon after he began to look into Isu artifacts. As an assassin, it's Arno's duty to keep these out of the wrong hands. But interestingly, Arno and Napoleon never directly confront each other in this DLC. There's some unresolved tension there. I'd say that it's possible their relationship isn't entirely broken, and we know this because at the end of AC Unity, there's a scene which takes place in 1808, which is years after the end of the DLC. So clearly they're together, man. But with Napoleon's conquest, Arno is now forced to face his former friend and perhaps even his transformation into a Templar. As for the modern day, man, the modern day. All jokes aside, that may have to be its own video if people really want to see it. But currently there isn't really much an idea for the modern day, as most of that stuff was actually dealt with in the comics and other forms of media. And it's stuff that I'd actually have to just make up on the spot, that's just straight fanfiction. Like, hey, I'm not really using any elements from the past games to build this. Now, let's dig deep and begin plotting together this plot. So, we begin the game in Paris, France, following a more seasoned Arno, still struggling after the events of the first game. Like in Dead Kings, Arno is suffering from clear signs of depression and his, built up trauma. I want this to be reflected in his appearance. He's more gruff and appears older than he actually is. In a way, I want Arno to parallel Ezio, because if he's meant to be an Ezio clone of some sorts, we should explore this in a more interesting manner. Ezio in his second game held a clean appearance as, he settles into his life as a master assassin. He discards his father's robes and adopts his own, as he is no longer an assassin for the purposes of revenge. This is his creed and way of life. Like Ezio, Arno realizes that the creed does not advocate for selfish desire and rather for selfless acts. Throughout Ezio's journey, he is mentored and taught this in a way that allows him to transform. However, Arno was forced to learn this the hard way through the loss of Elise. However, he is no longer bitter. He's only haunted by the tragic ghosts of his past. He lost his father at a young age, his adopted father, and then Elise as well. Despite this, Arno has a resolve to continue in upholding the values of the creed. He still sports his master assassin outfit from the first game, but its bright colours are faded, his robes are ragged and the gold is worn. A good reference for this would be Captain America's outfit in Infinity War. I was gonna say Civil War, but it's Infinity War. Don't call me a fraud, please. But basically, where Captain America had turned on his previous ideals, his costume in Infinity War now reflects that. And so we open up with Arno leaping across rooftops, armoured in his resolve and the values of the creed. And that perhaps is the one thing that may never leave him. We see this as he pushes on, vaulting over another rooftop and gaining on his target. Inevitably, he catches up and drags the target back. As Arno does so, the target's hood falls back, and this target would be revealed to be another assassin, much younger, and this would be his trainee, Leon from the DLC. It would be very clear from this initial interaction that Arno is no good as a teacher. He pushes Leon to work harder, but the young assassin is misguided and is unsure how to be better. If you recall from the events of Unity, he had murdered his own mentor and now he's responsible for a trainee of his own. Despite his best efforts, he thinks that he simply isn't fit to teach him anything. But you know, Arno is a master assassin, top of the ranks in the Brotherhood, probably the best assassin in France right now. So at the end of the day, it is his duty to mentor. And what I'm gonna say is that much of his style of teaching would be derived from Belek. He's hard on Leon. Their relationship should very much mirror that early relationship we saw between Arno and Belek in Unity. Arno isn't entirely serious, however. His witty and charismatic side would briefly resurface in moments like this one where Leon would probably manage to bring it out of him. Their relationship would be very much like Batman and Robin, especially like a younger version of Batman where he's not quite good at it himself. Here we would actually get our tutorial section of the game. Arno brings Leon to an assassin's training ground, and you know exactly what's gonna happen here. Arno's gonna perform various assassination techniques to which Leon is to follow exactly. So whilst Arno is teaching Leon, the player also learns as well. I would also introduce an old mechanic, the call assassin button, wherein you press a button to call in an ally who would perform an assassination or attack a target for you. I could picture it working in a similar manner to a God of War Ragnarok, where you could perform multiple presses for a combo or hold the button for a special ability. Arno's partner would also always follow him, perhaps also be able to perform additional duo parkour maneuvers that would allow the player to traverse faster. At this point, I should probably talk about how the open world will work. As this game is likely to have many locations across different continents, I personally don't believe that there should be one giant open world. Arno is a Parisian assassin, and so he will remain grounded in Paris. You could have it surrounding open fields or whatever they had at that time. Essentially, this main hub world can be as big as it needs to be, but quality should take precedence over quantity. One of my issues with Ezio Odyssey was that the world was too big and there wasn't a lot to do. However, the game would still be semi-open world with linear elements. Where the story will take us to different locations, it opens up new hub worlds that are only accessible for that sequence or even a singular mission. Think of Hitman, where each level is its own zone. We can do this on a much larger scale for Assassin's Creed. So one mission could actually just take you hours to complete because you're just in this large open environment. This way we can fill the game with detailed historical zones jam-packed with content and without the downside of a massive open world that feels empty. With the fallout of the French Revolution, I believe the assassin's job would be to uphold the French Republic and ensure that it does not fall to tyranny. Ominous foreshadowing. So a lot of these early missions would see Arno interacting with the French Parliament, watching from the shadows and ensuring things run smoothly. These simple jobs would also allow Leon to shadow Arno, and perhaps one of the first missions we get is the protection of a French official from a royalist, because you know they're still around for whatever reason. Our first combat scenario could take place here, and this is where I get to talk about what possible combat system would work for this Assassin's Creed game. Excluding AC's style of combat, Assassin's Creed combat has always felt very slow, especially in Unity. It's very floaty. There doesn't seem to be any weight behind the attacks. I think an assassin has to be fast, brutal, but also stylish. You could take inspiration from Ghost of Tsushima's dramatic combat, where you'd have to have some skill to take down a group of people, but at the same time they aren't just sponges that soak up damage. I'd also take some inspiration from the Arkham games as well, with a focus on takedowns, use of gadgets within battle, and environmental interactions. This would work very well for Assassin's Creed. In terms of stealth sections, I think Unity did this really well. Who knew a crouch button in an Assassin's Creed game would work wonders? Instead, I would work to smarten the enemy AI, a sort of paranoia system. The longer you take in stealth sections combined with the amount of mistakes you make increases the paranoia of your enemies. They begin to group up when they think Arno is near. They'll shoot hiding places instead of coming close and poking with a sword. If you're gonna bring back that annoying alarm bell system, have enemies be able to send other enemies to ring the alarm bell while they stay in the area and try and catch you from stopping the bell from being rung. Additionally, loud noises should be able to work as cover, allowing you to set up unique scenarios. Say the paranoia level is really high and an enemy is just shooting every hiding place. This would allow Arno to basically run around the zone because his footsteps are masked by the gunshots. So the idea is, while you should generally keep paranoia low, it could sometimes work in your favor. Perhaps when there's a smaller group of enemies, the strategy could be to max out paranoia so all the enemies are scrambling to find you. Anyway, back to the story at hand. The first sequence would take place in France. I feel like I've already said this. We're reintroducing the world and the characters and dealing with the immediate aftermath of the French Revolution and the events of Assassin's Creed Unity. Particularly focusing on the character of Arno, his struggles with the people he has lost, upholding the creed, and in mentoring Leon. There would be light political intrigue, however no Templars as of yet. We're mainly following the rise of the First Republic in France. In the second sequence, we would focus more on Napoleon and Arno, though he would appear in the first sequence as well if the history lines up. It should feel like an episode of Game of Thrones where you really can't trust anyone and you don't know who is the enemy. In this sequence, that relationship between Arno and Napoleon needs to be built up. I should also kind of make a note, I've tried to outline the story in sequences, though it is kind of hard to tell where like each sequence should end. But generally each sequence kind of just serves as a time skip, so when I make reference to a time skip, you can imagine it's a transition from one sequence to another. Anyway, Napoleon would be quite fond of Arno and somewhat unaware of his affiliation with the secretive order of assassins. He would definitely be appreciative of Arno's utility, and we would probably perform a bunch of odd jobs for Napoleon in this early game. Arno would be likewise. He would respect Napoleon's worldview, but the distrust would grow as Napoleon's ambitions also grow. Perhaps in this early game we get scenes of Napoleon talking about his love for Josephine, and this causes Arno to reflect on the loss of his own love. We would see Arno's growing mistrust of Napoleon in real time as Napoleon's victories begin to pile up. In the early part of the game, we would hear of Napoleon's victory over the Austrians and the Italians. Arno would continue to protect Napoleon, however he is warned by his enemies of the fact that Napoleon may become a dictator. Towards the end of the second sequence, Arno is called to stand before the French Brotherhood. Leon's training is almost complete, and he will begin his induction into the order as Arno did. The Brotherhood now have a different directive for Arno. A foreign mentor of the Brotherhood is soon to arrive in Paris, and Arno is expected to accompany this mentor and essentially just see to his needs. A very similar situation to Yusuf Tazim and Ezio Auditore. Arno is rightfully a bit pissed that just as soon as he was starting to get the hang of this kind of teaching thing, his pupil is taken from him and now he's expected to accompany this old assassin. It's kinda that younger Arno resurfacing once again. The order expects him to do something, but there's other major stuff going on that he needs to focus on. Despite that though, he's done some maturing and he sees to this mission anyway. The day arrives and Arno waits upon the Parisian docks. A ship arrives and soon the old mentor steps out. To Arno, he has no idea who this is, but to us, the players, we see an aged Connor Kenway step out and in front of Arno. Come on bro, it sounded like a fan fiction, but you're telling me Connor Kenway is alive at this time and I shouldn't use him? Man, fuck! This sequence is where the Assassin's Creed lore starts to creep in little by little, or well, rather it's kinda dropped on you like a bomb. In history, Napoleon would be across Europe at this time, so there would be less interactions between Napoleon and Arno. We're introduced to a much calmer Connor, more akin to how he acts in the homestead missions. He's found peace, he's older and wiser and now a mentor of the American Brotherhood. Connor would be between early to mid 40s, so his design would be updated heavily. I'd love to see a more native design for Connor's robes. Take his old ones and just refurbish them, something similar to this. Connor should definitely have size and presence to him. He may be much more peaceful now, but he should still feel like he's the deadliest assassin alive. For the first couple of weeks of Connor's arrival, he doesn't much tell Arno what he's doing and we run around doing a bunch of shit for him. We take him to former Templar strongholds in Paris where he collects documents, investigates, and sometimes we help him take down targets as well. Connor would obviously replace Leon as Arno's partner. He would have two types of attacks, 3 bow shots and a 3-string combo where he uses Tomahawk. Connor would also of course have the ability to assassinate targets for Arno. His ability could be that when you activate it, if Arno was to be hit in combat, Connor would grab Arno and automatically counter the enemy, a reference to AC3's combat. There's a lovely contrast between Arno and Connor. Arno is suffering from his trauma, he's grim and isolated. Arno struggles to be a teacher for Leon, and then there is Connor, the perfect assassin, a much better mentor, wiser and more experienced. He's very much reflecting the older versions of Altair and Ezio through his actions and wisdom. I mean, they are related in some way after all. Connor may see a lot of himself within Arno, harboring resentment and guilt. And he may respect Arno a lot from steering away from the path that he himself once failed to, a path of bloody vengeance. In subtle ways, Connor will mentor Arno, and through Connor teaching Arno, Arno himself will learn how to be a better mentor for Liam and perhaps the French Brotherhood as a whole. At the beginning, however, Arno resents Connor for his secrecy and doesn't at all respect his authority. The dynamic would be that Connor finds this very much amusing and deigns to test Arno by putting him through various challenges. Over the course of these Connor missions, Arno would learn of the rise and fall of the Colonial Brotherhood and how Connor eventually restored it. At the end of this, Arno would begin to respect Connor a bit from how he built the Brotherhood back all by himself. The question would remain, however, what caused the American Brotherhood's devastation? After a bit of dramatic irony, Connor would find exactly what he was looking for this entire time. A letter from a Templar agent detailing his possession of a precursor box. The letter reads as arrogant, the Templar stating that he will not hand over possession to the French right. At this point, Connor then decides to give the final part of the story, detailing the devastation of the American Brotherhood at the hands of his father Haytham Kenway and rogue assassin Shay Patrick Cormac. In this monologue, however, we see that Connor does not actually harbour any resentment for Shay. He admits the wrongs of the Colonial Brotherhood. They had overstepped, and their mistakes meant that they were severely punished by the Templars. But it remains that there are wrongs that Shay must also pay for, as his father did. And Arno is like, damn, this guy is raw as fuck. To Connor, Shay is a loose end. He spent most of the years following the events of AC3 chasing the echoes of Shay across America, his last target. However, Shay continues to elude him. We don't at all know much of what happens to Shay following the events of 1776, apart from the fact that he has a son and a grandson that survive him. His grandson was active in New York City in the 1800s, so he eventually did return at some point. I don't believe it was an immediate return, however, considering that the American right of Templars was wiped out, leaving Shay as the only survivor. I find it very interesting that Arno finds a bunch of Isu artifacts within Unity and Dead Kings. It may be entirely possible that Shay never left France at all, pledging to stay in the area to secure the artifacts. From Shay's quote at the end of Rogue, "It's time we had a revolution of our own," it seems that he may have had a hand in the French Revolution. Perhaps the chaos was necessary to secure control over the Isu artifacts, like Napoleon did. Anyway, I'm revealing too much at one time. Let's continue. Shay continues to elude our duo. However, Connor may have a hypothesis that Shay remains in France, with Arno commenting on the Isu artifacts he had found in the area, and Connor also relating his own experiences. Arno confides in Connor that he had the Apple of Eden sent to Egypt, and the Sword of Eden remains powerless. Connor would probably have commended Arno for this, having also gotten rid of the apple that he found back in AC3. So it kind of becomes clear to both that the Isu artifacts are safe for now, but how long until the Templars figure out where Arno had sent that apple? They must root out Shay before he eludes them again. These would open up a set of missions for you, where Arno and Connor would team up on various raids across the landscape of France. This would give us the opportunity to visit some exciting locations that aren't locked to Paris. For me, one such location would probably be the Mont Saint-Michel. I don't know. This would be an absolutely beautiful and also cool flipping mission, considering it's such a big area. Essentially, the point is to attack different Templar settlements and slowly gain information on what Shay has been up to. Some of these can be historical sites for the French Templars, and it would be an opportunity to do more world building with the French Rite of Templars. I mean, it would be so cool to learn more about those 13th century Templars. The other side would be learning through various letters about what Shay has been up to for all these years. It would be mainly him writing to various Templar leaders over the years about Templar business. It's also maybe time that we talked about customization options. I don't think AC has ever really struggled with customization options, but perhaps my favorite way would be an adaptation of the older games and also what they did in Origins. Specifically, Arno would have specific pieces of his gear that are consistent but also can be upgraded or have their style changed, and this would give a different appearance. For instance, Bayek's braces would go from simple to incredibly ornate jewels and designs, and then underneath these cosmetics you could have different unlockable outfits. Perhaps many Templar inspired outfits can be unlocked for Arno in these side missions, suits that look similar to Haytham's robes or even Shay's. There would also be different weapons and artifacts available for Arno to collect. Cool stuff. On the side of the main sequence of memories for Arno, why did I say it like that? Bro, I think someone's possessing my body. Oh my god. Leon would once again be joining him as his partner, and we're straight back to the Napoleon struggle. After AC Unity, the Templars had been more or less cleared off the board with the death of their Grand Master at the hands of Arno. In AC Unity, it is important to know that the Templars backed the Royalists, and I say that in quotations because it was actually the new Templar regime under Germain. The scheme was clearly more about sparking a revolution than outright backing the monarchy and the royalists. If you think about it, the revolution essentially cleared out everyone in charge, and that's perfect for the Templars. But of course, Arno put a stop to it by assassinating Germain. Around this point in real history, there was a coup, the coup of 18 Fruchidor. What are these words, bro? In the French government, where power was forcibly seized from the royalists. This prevented a potential restoration of the monarchy, and I personally think that the assassins would be backing this coup. The Templars likely still have influence over the royalists, and so any monarch that they prop up on the French throne could be a Templar puppet if not a Templar themselves. This coup was also supported by Napoleon Bonaparte. We could have a mission of Arnaud ensuring the support of Napoleon in the plot, only to find out that he had already made his move. Napoleon would probably then enlist the help of Arnaud like he always does, and this would probably be another mission. Wow, such interesting mission structure. All jokes aside, this is a very interesting period of history that could serve as a great series of story missions. It just requires me to do more reading than a simple Wikipedia page. This little Napoleon subplot could also open up a free roam location in Italy, whether it be the location of Napoleon's forces or somewhere cooler like Rome. I'll leave it to you guys to decide. We end this sequence with the coup. It should be a victory, but there's a bitter taste in Arnaud's mouth. Hidden amongst the parliamentarians, Arnaud is still and waiting. In this sequence, the Connor side missions continue. There wouldn't be many per sequence, and they aren't required to complete as of early game. However, once you complete 3, a strange mission takes place. Connor is out on mentor business, so you undertake the raid alone. You make your way through this French stronghold, perhaps a Knights Templar chapel, and leave with nothing. Maybe some cosmetic loot to appease the player, but for Arnaud it's a long ride home. In the dead of night, Arnaud leaves the chapel. However, he finds himself face to face with an older man. A hood shadows much of his face. He's dressed in worn leather, once black, now a faded grey. The few who have played AC Rogue will probably recognise this man by his voice as Shay Cormac, but to Arnaud it's only a stranger in the night. Now, why have I introduced Shay so early? Well, for one, he's not one to hide. I think it's important to introduce Shay as soon as we can, because most fans will know exactly who Shay is, and as soon as Connor mentions some rogue assassin destroying the Brotherhood, it's like a Jason in Arkham Knight situation. We know he's the Arkham Knight, but waiting to make that reveal ends up having less impact. Come to pray? The man asks. I just finished, Arnaud would reply. The man is definitely strange, but is actually not his problem, and so he turns to leave. What do you know of the Knights Templar? This question catches Arnaud as he's about to exit. It piques his interest. They were men of God. Who are you? The man laughs lightly at this. A man of God, nothing more. I have come to pray. Will you join me? Arnaud sighs and joins this man in silent prayer. Afterwards, the man notes Arnaud's wear as armed to the teeth, or something similar. He assumes Arnaud is the reliable sort and asks him to accompany him on his journey back to whatever city/town is nearest, or if anything, just back to Paris. Since Arnaud is coincidentally heading in the same direction, he obliges the request. Arnaud is highly suspicious of this man, while the man is seemingly trying to get Arnaud to talk. They talk about philosophy, chaos versus order, a debate of the assassins versus Templar conflict disguised as a simple conversation between travelers. Here we would see the stark differences in the ideologies between Shay and Arnaud. They are both affiliated with the Templars in some ways. Arnaud was raised by Templars but joined the Assassins, whereas Shay was raised by the Assassins but rejected them for the Templars. They are the only ones who can see both sides to this conversation. However, at this point in his life, Shay sees the situation more as black and white. I can exemplify this by the fact that he decided to stay with the Templars, even with all the stuff the Colonial Brotherhood did wrong. Working with the Templars is not at all a saving grace, especially considering what they went on to do in the colonies. Arnaud, on the other hand, may be more morally grey. There are bad Templars, Germain, but good ones like his foster father and Elise. Along the way, the pair may come across bandits harassing some townfolk. After they intervene, the bandits turn their sights on the two, and so Arnaud gets involved in this little kerfuffle. After the fight, Arnaud turns around to see one of the bandits clutching at his gut, wheezing slowly before falling limp on the ground. Arno is surprised that this old man is so capable, but looking around, the man has also mysteriously vanished. On inspecting the wound, he recognizes the mark of an assassin's blade. This troubles Arno, and he realizes he must find this mysterious stranger. This could continue in small sections when Arno returns to Paris. Arno could have conversations with members of the Brotherhood about previous members of the French Brotherhood. We'd hear mentions of his father and Belek, but no one that resembles the stranger that Arno had met. So Arno's kind of first assumption about this stranger was that he is very suspicious, but once he kind of recognizes the hidden blade, he starts to think that perhaps this was an exiled member of the Brotherhood, someone who was once an assassin but turned away from that life. In a way, he's partly right. Continuing on from this in the main sequence, Connor would provide perhaps the most interesting discussion. He relays his own experience of the French Brotherhood, though limited as it is. But he is interested by the tale of the mysterious stranger that Arno is like to tell. He explains that there are instances of Templars who have opted for the use of a hidden blade, foremost among them his father Haytham Kenway. Then he would give a slight look of regret, as he would then go on to tell Arno that his father, Charles Dorian, was actually murdered by a Templar who also used a hidden blade. I'm not sure if Arno was ever aware of this fact, but if he wasn't, he is now. That night, Arno would dream of a memory that occurred in the first game when he was inducted into the Assassin's Order, but here it would be a little different. He stands before a corpse, his father's. It lay similar to the one he found back at that town, and upon inspecting the wound he finds it in the exact same place, the mark of an assassin's blade. Arno then notices his own hidden blade, fully extended and teeming with blood. The killer, hooded and robed in a similar vein to himself, stands behind him before charging at Arno. He runs from this killer and then leads a deadly chase. The killer catches Arno off guard, swiping at his leg and causing Arno to stumble over. The killer then leaps at him, blade extended out, and Arno can only parry it with his own blade. They grapple at each other, Arno realizing then that he is fighting himself, except his reflection's eyes are cold and dead, his face pale. He then wakes from this dream. In terms of Shay, it is pertinent to assume that Connor is someone he is looking to avoid. It is, unclear how much information is kept about Shay in the following years after Assassin's Creed Rogue, if there is any. Connor may not even know what he is looking for, but if Connor is aware of a few things, which he may be because Achilles could have kept some type of record, such as Shay's name and his origin, this could make it very easy for Connor to recognize Shay immediately upon interaction. Simultaneously, Napoleon would form the army of England in a planned invasion of Britain, because of course he did. At this point, Arno would be feeling that there's something off about Napoleon. His ambition is starting to exceed him, and he does remember the events of Dead Kings when Napoleon sought an Isu artifact. His interests don't align with the assassins, but they do not align with the Templars either. Depending on how much you want to build the relationship between Arno and Napoleon, it could be that Napoleon has begun to hide his intentions from Arno, instead merely using him as an errand boy. Arno could notice this and confront Napoleon. Here the cracks begin to form. Napoleon could reference the events of Dead Kings where he ended that DLC arrested, and he could highlight that he knows it was Arno partly responsible. Arno would be used to lying, but of course lying to Napoleon only twists that knife. Napoleon then swiftly changes the subject, mindlessly talking on his army of England and explaining how they're not yet powerful enough to take on the might of Britain. So instead, he'll invade Egypt, undermine the British influence on trade, or whatever. And at this point, Arno is basically shitting bricks. Is Napoleon speaking the truth, or are his intentions more sinister? Does he yet again seek the Isu artifact? It is a tense conversation and Arno can't simply ask him and risk revealing its location. All the while, Napoleon watches and gauges his reaction. Arno leaves in a huff, telling Napoleon that his ambition misguides him and he would find nothing but dust beside in Egypt. Obviously, for this to occur, Napoleon and Arno must have some sort of friendship, which, while probably unrealistic, would make sense given the context of unity and how much we saw of Napoleon there. In any regard, this is red alarms for the French Brotherhood. Napoleon intends to invade Egypt. Arno and Connor now descend on Egypt in the footsteps of Napoleon's marching army. It would be so cool if we could witness historical battles like the Battle of the Pyramids, even though they weren't actually near the pyramids. Cairo would definitely become a main city location, ripe with its own side quests and collectibles. You may be thinking though, hang on, Egypt was already a location in Assassin's Creed Origins, though Cairo itself hadn't been a city in the time that was set, so there's definitely something new to do here. In terms of the story, it's the location of the Assassin's Bureau that Arno had sent that piece of Eden to. Connor and Arno would find the Bureau in disarray, wounded men, scattered documents, and complete with its own set of problems that have to be dealt with at a later time. Napoleon's men have been harassing the Brotherhood, and this has escalated into broad day clashes between the Brotherhood and the army in the streets of Cairo. Side note, I don't know if Napoleon's army was ever in Cairo, but you could probably find a way to justify this, man. Come on. One of your goals in Cairo would be to de-escalate this conflict. Firstly, it compromises the Brotherhood by making their work public. Secondly, it also endangers public citizens. And then thirdly, it paints the Brotherhood in a very bad light. You gotta get that PR training. Additionally, I would like to note that this expedition was really an important time in history. Many scientific discoveries were made, and most famously, this expedition uncovered the Rosetta Stone. I think this game should definitely touch on that. While the Rosetta Stone sounds cool, it actually isn't anything mythical. Not everything has to be Isu related, but perhaps in terms of the wider story, the discovery of the Rosetta Stone led to the explosion of Egyptology in the wider world. Scientifically, it was great. In other cases, not so great. Egyptian culture became sort of fetishized, possibly a case of Orientalism that someone smarter than me could analyze. This reflects the story of Assassin's Creed. How leaders will despoil ancient Isu artifacts for their own vain, selfish purposes. Also, Assassin's Creed games always has that wacky science, bro, that our main character has to help on various occasions. Jean-Francois Champollion, I don't know if I said that, I was just taking the piss, but Jean-Francois was the man who deciphered the Rosetta Stone, and my sources, Wikipedia. I'm not too sure of his character, nor if he was even on the expedition, but someone like this should definitely kidnap Arno for some wacky misadventures in Egypt. Back to the story, Connor would stay behind to aid the Brotherhood in their defenses while Arno sets out to secure the artifact. He must find Al-Mualim, who was the mentor of the Egyptian Brotherhood he entrusted that artifact to. He doesn't end up finding him though, but this does lead into our second encounter of Shay. He leaps down from the rafters of the building Al-Mualim was meant to be found in and struts slowly towards Arno. He doesn't recognize Shay at first, but soon it becomes clearer. He wears no hood this time, his dark hair struck with grey, though still in a traveller's robes, speckled with dust and dirt from the sands of Egypt. It's you, isn't it? The last thing that he had expected was to find the stranger here of all places. Shay grits his teeth and then turns his back. It's of no importance, and we are wasting time. Arno would void caution and charge at Shay, hidden blade loose and set at his neck. But Shay immediately catches this, countering with his own blade pointing at Arno's gut. Arno sees this, and for a slight moment, he freezes. His instincts return when Shay shoves him aside. The artifact. That is what you are here for, am I wrong? Then you know why we must find it. Arno notices this, and what do you suppose we do? Al-Mualim has vanished. You're out of luck. I make my own. It may seem that Arno is playing it too safe, but he kinda has to. He's an assassin. He can't really waste time and energy fighting this random guy. He has no idea of his allegiances and he can only assume. He needs to gather information. He may have his suspicions on Shay being a Templar, but Arno has been open to working with Templars in the past. Also, while he is hot-headed, Arno does opt for caution and is able to stay his blade until the right moment. Much of his suspicions would be laid out introspectively. As it so happens though, Shay does actually have all the answers. He would tell Arno of the ancient temples hidden around Egypt. If I am to be sure of anything relating to Shay following the events of AC Rogue, I am 100% sure that Shay would know of different Isu structures scattered around the world. His whole reason for defecting in the first place was because of that Lisbon incident. I'm pretty sure he would devote a lot of his later life to ensuring these structures remained untouched or protected from any hostile influence. More importantly, the apple probably would have been kept somewhere less obvious than the main site of the Egyptian Brotherhood. Perhaps even a conveniently placed secret vault beneath the Sphinx, which would be a fun way to tie Origins into Unity 2. I don't know what we're gonna call it yet, bro. Interestingly enough, the Siwa vault in AC Origins had a map of other type vaults around the world. It's probable that Shay may have encountered a map of this sort in his travels. He would know of two vaults, the one beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza and another one beneath the Sphinx. These are the two closest to Cairo and likely location of the artifact. So Shay states he'll go to the pyramid, whilst Arno checks the Sphinx. However, Arno would check Shay one last time, asking his intentions with the artifact. It would be safer in my hands than that of anybody else. And if I happen upon it first, find it, and we shall see. Arno makes his way to the Sphinx, finding it surrounded by much of Napoleon's encampment. Based on their last meeting, he finds it best to avoid any confrontation with Napoleon and his officers. But with the help of his little scientist buddy, he is able to make safe passage into the Sphinx. He finds the secret entrance, as Bayek once did, and travels deep beneath the Sphinx. But who else does he find but Napoleon, surrounded by a small guard? Before him, the ancient vault that once held the Isu armour opens up and reveals the same apple he sought years ago. He grabs it with both hands and turns to find Arno charging at him. Arno kills two of his guards, fatally wounds another, before Napoleon uses the power of the apple.
Submit.
And Arno is forced to his knees. He cannot even gaze upon the face of Napoleon. Arno Dorian, my dear friend, you may not believe it, but I do regret how our last meeting went. There were many things left unsaid. I don't personally think this characterization of Napoleon is one for monologues. Instead, he calls out, "You had the right of it. France has much to thank of you." Arno cannot see who he is talking to, but we see black footsteps trailing into our view, stepping over the bodies Arno had left. A voice in a distinct accent mutters, "Dorian." And then it addresses Napoleon. "I need no thanks from France. My work is done for the sake of the world." "You are truly noble then. I suppose I shall return this to you." Arno struggles to look up. He cannot see the heads of the two men talking, but he can see their hands exchanging the apple. Arno calls out in protest, but they ignore him. The man leaves with echoing footsteps, and then Napoleon speaks to Arno once again. "I know that you might find cause to disagree. That is why I cannot let you continue. But know that what I do for the good of the Republic. I do not harbor resentment for you, nor wish to make you any enemy of mine." Arno struggles. "Then why can't I even look upon your face?" "I'm sorry, Arno. When you return to France, seek me out. We shall talk then, as men." They leave Arno there, quaking. After a while, the paralysis releases and he falls on his side. We open up sequence 6 with intercutting scenes and a narration from Arno, basically explaining what happened. Him returning back to Cairo, and then him back in France, he and Leon witnessing the coup of Brumaire. This is when Napoleon seized power and became the first consul of France. By this point, Egypt would probably still be open to us via fast travel or something, because you may seek to help the Egyptian Brotherhood rebuild, you may seek to find the secrets of the hidden ones, or uncover the mystery behind the vanishing of Al-Mualim. But obviously we begin our fated meeting with the first consul Napoleon. Here an interesting conversation would take place, and this would echo much of the conversation that Arno had with Shay previously, except Napoleon obviously has different views. He does hold much of the Templar ideology, the belief of maintaining peace through order and subjugation, and Arno would argue for the freedom of humanity. And this conversation essentially serves to ease the tensions between the two, and this will definitely be needed as canonically Arno is still helping out Napoleon at this point. I don't know why, bro. So now you see why I couldn't just make Napoleon an outright villain from the start. But I think it's more interesting this way. He's like misunderstood, okay? But yes, in 1800, Napoleon is targeted by assassins on a night out at the opera. And this is actually a mission that you can do in AC Unity, but here we will see how it actually took place. In the game you're assisted by an online team, but here you're assisted by Leon. Both you and Leon systematically take out the snipers targeting the Infernal Machine, which is an explosive device aimed to take Napoleon out with it, which is a crazy plan, I'm not gonna lie. I see the reason for Arno's defense of Napoleon as one, he needs to find the apple, and if he can reason with Napoleon, it would be the safest and probably easiest way to secure it once again. And he's also like, you are my friend, I don't hear you. I've also decided to group the rest of these sequences together as they mostly just deal with the Napoleonic Wars, and this is like a 15-year period in which the rest of the sequences can just play out. I'm gonna focus less on the mission structure because I feel like you guys get a point. I like big set pieces, I like the compelling side content, reasons to even play the side content, and they need to make us feel like Batman, an assassin. Yeah. There's a 5-year period in which Napoleon is the first consul of France. At this point, Napoleon and Arno make steady progress on their little friendship. We once again help out Napoleon with various consul related tasks, and he tells us what he wants us to know. There's not really much that occurs in this period apart from Napoleonic reforms and fun stuff like the Louisiana Purchase. Generally, we should be able to feel a change when roaming Paris. We should be able to see and hear the public opinions on Napoleon, his officers patrolling the streets, putting down opposition, etc, etc. Arno may enter Napoleon's inner circle of advisors, all of which characters we should start to get to know very well. However, it's very clear to Arno that Napoleon's ambition is forever growing and always takes precedence. On the other side of things, Connor would have most likely figured out that Arno encountered Shay. He is bitter that Arno failed to procure the artifact, but from his own experience he can know that there was not really much he could afford to do. They now essentially have to wait for Shay to reveal himself or for Napoleon to give up his location, neither of which seems very probable. This 5-year period should really be a cooldown for the craziness of the last couple of sequences. I want to focus on side characters and side content. Someone like Leon, Arno should really be focusing on him, but he's distracted by the events that occurred in Egypt. During this period we could also have some more wacky misadventures relating to Egyptology, this time in Paris, and basically representing its influence on the rest of Europe. It would also be great to bring back some old features like perhaps upgrading the theatre. Maybe Arno could own a bigger establishment or like a chain of them. Mainly I would want Arno to have more of a presence here. I want it to feel like it's Arno actually building and improving something rather than only the player. You know, like in Red Dead 2 when you upgrade the camp, it feels like something that Arthur would actually do, you know. Or like in AC4 when you upgrade the jackdaw, it contextually makes sense, so that same kind of logic should apply here. In 1803, Napoleon enters war once again, and Arno finds himself remembering Napoleon's words about his supposed commitment to the interests and protection of France. Arnold would still be protecting Napoleon despite this, defending him from British assassination attempts. Napoleon brutally executes the Duke of that's my best attempt, who was supposedly involved with this. And then Arno is once again conflicted on whether he's doing the right thing. Arno is also shocked to learn of this execution, because where had Napoleon gained his insight? And this is where Napoleon himself will reveal that he conspired with another, Shay, the man who took the apple back in Egypt. Though Napoleon's not gonna mention him by name, Arno is gonna be able to deduce this himself. So essentially he's now aware of Shay's Templar allegiance and knows that he is like a shadow hand guiding Napoleon's actions. However, this might not at all be the whole truth. In 1804, Napoleon was crowned Emperor of the French after having been convinced by his supporters that this would protect his regime and put him on equal footing with other European monarchs. Arno is, of course, there to witness this event, and one of Napoleon's advisors, familiar with Arno, recognizes him and quickly ushers him over. They will begin a strange kind of conversation on Napoleon's quick rise to power. And for the longest time, this game, well, theoretical game, has avoided the use of Templars. With how Arno dismantled them in the first game, they were left as only an echo of their former self. There are, of course, remnants of the order, but they have no purpose and no hidden schemes. The only really kind of outright Templar is Shay, but even his motivations are shrouded in mystery. But finally, in this scene, it all comes to fruition. Napoleon will pick the crown up with the edge of his sword. At the same time, Napoleon's advisor remarks that he will make a true emperor. The father of understanding will guide us.
What?
No, alright, I know that sound.
In the preceding moments, Arno will quickly grab his advisor and ask him to repeat what he said. On his finger, a ring bearing the insignia of the Templar Order. If you recall, before this they used kind of silver pins, but this offers a return for the rings. The advisor will push him off with little to no resistance. Arno, dumbfounded, stares into the eyes that appear under the crown of the Emperor of the French. Essentially, Napoleon has been unknowingly guided by the Templars into becoming their figurehead, a puppet essentially. I said essentially twice. However, what's interesting about this situation is that we all know Napoleon is no puppet. So obviously he's shocked at this revelation, right? But Arno might actually see an opportunity here. Napoleon is like a friend to him. If he is a type of figurehead or leader for the Templars, he could once again work to close that divide between the assassins and Templars. If you really think about it, it is an unnecessary war. AC Rogue showed us why the assassins cannot get their way, and then AC3 directly showed us why the Templars can't get their way. Arno's father, mentor, and adoptive father all sought to end the Templar assassin war by entering into an alliance. He himself could embody this idea and restore the alliance, this necessary balance that he may come to realize and see. At the end of AC Unity, Arno had come full circle and finally understood the creed, that it was not a means for his own vendetta, rather a warning to those who chase their obsessions. His relentless pursuit in that first game led to him losing Elise. Perhaps here his pursuit of these shadow Templars would almost be like deja vu for him. Templars opposed the assassins, yes, but he personally eradicated those who truly threatened the peace that France had. Shall he do the same for Napoleon just because he supposedly sits at the head of the Templar Order? What if they just rise another, someone that he can't reason with? So for now, he does not intervene in Napoleon's affairs. Now, you may be a bit confused at where Napoleon actually stands. Is he a Templar? Is he the father of understanding akin to Caesar? Well, I don't think he'd actually know himself. I mean, he sees himself as emperor, but the facts are that he was blessed by the Pope on his coronation and adorned with the crown of Charlemagne, who dubbed himself the Emperor of the Romans. In this fashion, Napoleon may have inherited the Roman Empire as Charlemagne believed he did. It is then apt to add that many Roman emperors were in fact leaders of the Order of the Ancients, who later transformed into the Templar Order as we know. It is undeniable that the title of Emperor and the manner of power which Napoleon had obtained would give you impossible influence over the world. So it's to say that it may not even matter if he has any Templar title, he is just at the top naturally. This type of influence may backfire on someone like Shay Cormac, a lifelong Templar agent at this point, but with no true sway over the politics of France as he did perhaps a century ago. It may come that the piece of Eden that Shay wanted to keep out of the wrong hands ends directly back into Napoleon's grasp once again. We know from extended lore that Napoleon had been seeking other piece of Eden artifacts around this time, so it's never in doubt that he was just going to let the apple slip through his hands again. Shay is the GOAT. He's also very old around this time, reaching into his 70s. Foresight may allow him to protect the apple, but with Napoleon's growing influence, whatever remains of Shay's circle may close in on him and return the apple to the Emperor. By no means will Shay let this slide, but Napoleon has a plan for this. If he recognizes him as a threat, then he very much is a loose end, one that could be tied up very neatly if he tells Arno what he knows. So you see, Napoleon can play both sides, and I wanted to give this impression that he was very smart and calculated. He's just not a pawn. Like, people are trying to make him a pawn, but he's just not that guy. Don't play with him. That sounded so weird. At this point, we begin to see the victories of the Grand Army, as in real history. Napoleon sifts through Europe and coils around it with the grip of a snake. Austria and Russia shudders beneath him. We can argue that some of this was due to the apple, but if it happened in reality, why would you bother? At the end of AC Unity, the last we really see of Napoleon and Arno is in 1808. They recover the body of Germain and bury him in the Paris catacombs. After this, Napoleon could relay the information to Arno of Shay and his whereabouts. The two will then part ways after this, amicably. Arno takes this information to Connor, whilst Napoleon is free to abuse the apple as much as he likes. Arno and Connor have finally caught up with Shay. They find him at his hideout. No tricks, no guards, just him, sitting alone in the comforts of an armchair. Shay would look older than when we saw him last, cause much time has passed. The grey creeps comfortably through his hair. His face remains strong and he is dressed in robes that befit a Grand Master of the Templar Order. Old man, are you the one they call Shay? Connor will ask. He knows the answer, it's only courtesy. I am, Shay will respond. Then you know why you must die. Connor will stay, his hidden blade drawn. Sheath your blade, boy. Is it revenge for Achilles you seek? Your father knew the truth of that whole ordeal, and he would bid you to help me. My blade won't waver, not ever. In the end, that was the truth my father knew best. I bear you no ill will, but for your conviction that faltered, the friends that you killed, and the order you betrayed. Shay seems to wince at this. I took no pride in what I did. What I did was... Then he smirks, just a little. You sound like Achilles. He looks over to Arno. And you? What part of this is yours to play? The apple. You've entrusted it to Napoleon. Traitors. He looks between Arno and Connor. You speak of me, but they surround us all. The Templars now look to Napoleon for guidance. He struggles out of his chair, then stands firm. At once, he kicks over a chair and throws it into Connor. Arno rushes in, but Shay hits heavy and hard. As soon as Connor gets up, however, the struggle becomes entirely one-sided. You know Connor is gonna smack him up arguably at any point in the timeline, but Shay has spent his life harboring pieces of Eden, keeping them safe. Of course, he will use them to gain the upper hand, no matter the cost. Imagine bringing it back to the old days. fighting clones of Shay, etc. Eventually, Shay gets the upper hand on both of you and straight books it, leading you into a darker, more open area where Shay is able to use his stealth techniques. This whole game, you have been the assassin stalking your prey, and now it's your time to be hunted. Shay will have access to all of your mechanics and a few of his own. This should essentially feel like a PvP Assassin's Creed game where you should be careful not to enter Shay's range lest he jump down and just straight up murder you. If it's a straight assassination, it insta-kills you. If you manage to counter it, it bites a portion of your health. You need to lure Shay out with strategy, maybe using Connor to bait him out and then just jumping him together. Eventually you wear each other out. He struggles to bring down Connor, which gives enough time for Arno to engage in hand-to-hand combat. Shay, while old, is more deadly, but Arno is quicker. Shay lands a death blow into Arno's stomach, giving him enough time to procure the precursor box. He says, Connor will not care for this, though you need to know the truth. The box opens up and paralyzes Arno. You know when you die in Assassin's Creed and you just like desynchronize? Like the world starts to fall apart. This will happen to Arno in real time, fading into white as we see Connor rushing in once again. We could have a really cool mission idea where Shay uses the precursor box to inject Arno with his own memories. Think of the glitch animus sessions during AC Unity where we would go to like World War II Paris, for example. Those missions were really cool, though they did take you out of the game as they had nothing to do with Arno. Imagine this time we revisit the Lisbon earthquake, but it is Arno reliving Shay's memories, the world piecing together around him like it often does when synchronizing with the Animus, and then Shay's voice telling Arno to simply run. Arno is baffled at the destruction caused at the hands of a piece of Eden, the sheer horror and the violence. As he runs through the city, Shay's memories can be heard in the background, his arguments with Achilles, conversations with Hatham, and probably his regrets about those closest to him. This could be the bleeding effect, where Arno begins to truly learn of Shay's beliefs. Arno tries desperately to save as many in Lisbon as he can, but the devastation takes 5 for every one that he does. At last, he sees a building collapsing and dives to save a woman and her child. However, the debris flings itself and threatens to crush Arno. Time slows, and he desynchronizes. Waking up in the room, he sees Connor and Shay locked in battle. Shay is skilled but is showing his age as Connor goes blow for blow, swiping at Shay's legs and bringing him to the floor. His hidden blade springs forth and seeks Shay's heart, but Arno grabs his wrist before Connor can commit himself. There is no wisdom in killing Shay, he will say. His experience has bled through into Arno, and he now knows that Shay's conviction, while wrong, is true, if that makes sense. Both Templar and Assassin can see that they share a common enemy, Napoleon. The artifacts are clearly not for the common man to possess, and while Napoleon may believe himself anything but common, his possession of the apple will wrought nothing but destruction. They will need whatever is left of Shay's resources in order to combat Napoleon, and so we get an uneasy alliance. Shay, Connor and Arno will work together to retrieve the piece of Eden and put an end to Napoleon's ambitions. This sets the stage for, I guess, the third act of the game, if this was like a movie or something. Perhaps this part of the game will be spent rebuilding the Templar Order to some capacity, which is an interesting twist. You meet Shay's former allies and either assassinate or turn them back to Shay's side. The favor must be shifted from Napoleon back to Shay. At the same time, the Cairo Brotherhood is rebuilt, and obviously this was a side mission, but it would be a requirement at this point, and they've done this in other games, so don't complain to me, mate. Well, obviously the Cairo Brotherhood is rebuilt and now in an alliance with the French Brotherhood. This would probably be enough manpower to take on the Grand Army. Not in an actual battle. Never. On the other side of things, the bleeding effect has left Arno reeling. After that initial mission where Arno receives Shay's memories, he'll have a strange and dark vision. He's in front of Versailles again, as it looked when he was young. But before him stands a man speaking words he can't hear. It may be that he'll recognize him or he won't, but the player definitely will, as Benjamin Franklin. The memory ends not before long. Working with Shay may be more difficult than Arno had anticipated. His methods certainly were carried over from the assassins, but he is a Templar through and through. Shay pushes him to be more ruthless, deadly, and to not spare anyone, kind of mirroring the missions that Connor undertook with Hatham. In any case, this will all culminate before 1812. At this point, we will have undermined Napoleon's operations enough and gathered enough manpower to directly hurt the movements of his army. When Napoleon traverses through Russia, Arno is there too, taking out targets, ensuring the army is stalled enough to halt his advance. However, Arno may not see it as enough. Shay comes forth with more information that Templar agents await in Moscow to welcome Napoleon into the city. Connor offers his plan to infiltrate Moscow and kill these agents, ensuring Napoleon will not be able to gain the city. However, Shay thinks that this will definitely waste time, and Napoleon may gain the city no matter what. Though, if they were to burn the city, this may prove a more adept strategy. They can continue to stall Napoleon's advance all the while Napoleon is denied Moscow, its resources, and any allies that may await him inside the city. Of course, the city would be abandoned in reality, so casualties would be minimal. Arno sees this as the clear course of action. He would get no rebuttals from Connor while he and Shay get to work. During this mission, Arno would admit to Shay that he has received more visions of his life, the bleeding effects have taken full place. Shay's skills would start to become his own. He would undeniably begin to understand Shay more, and if he didn't already, see that he does indeed have a point. He may even see himself killing the colonial assassins as Shay did. Blood on his hands. Would he stray from a different path had he been in Shay's shoes? Still, he has no understanding of why Shay would continue as a Templar after the colonial brotherhood was destroyed. Shay will say that the creed offered no better solutions, and Arno will call Shay out for this, stating that he had a weak conviction and easily swallowed the half-truths of the Templars. Arno would see to the burning of Moscow alongside Shay, who would continue on their conversation from earlier. He asks Arno why he continued with the assassins after the many wrongs he suffered under them. Had you been with the Templars, Elise would still live. The fault of her death lay with none but me. Assassins do not control the fate of others, and no matter how hard they try, neither do the Templars. Shay would be stunned into silence, but at this moment, Arno begins to suffer once again from the bleeding effect. He's taken back to Versailles, vaulting through a window and across the rafters, finding himself in an all too familiar room. Arno's expression softens at the sight of the two children, his hand inching closer, wondering if it's all even real, though his gaze shifts to a glass window in front of him. In its reflection, the shifting figure of Shay Patrick Cormac. The sequence ends. Arno wakes in the company of the assassins. Shay and Connor are working to damage whatever is left of the Grand Army and see if they can seize the apple too. Arno and the assassins will return to France, where they seek to end Napoleon's reign once and for all. Of course, Napoleon is defeated a year after Moscow, and a couple of months later he abdicates. We can say that this is due to the combined efforts of the assassins and Templars. With Napoleon put to bed, the apple is basically just thrown up in the air, and now the assassins and Templars must squabble over who catches it. At last we meet Connor again, aged further from when we first met him all those years ago. Still, his conviction remains strong, but he knows his final mission is coming to an end. Connor would reveal his retirement plans, making reference to his daughter if, she's born at this point. It'll be a bittersweet conversation as our time with Connor is coming to a close. Arno would have grown over the course of the game to respect Connor deeply as a mentor and as an assassin, his prowess unparalleled. Arno would tell Connor of Shay's memories, remarking the last one as particularly strange. Shay had been there at Versailles, a hunter of the assassins, prowling the halls the very day my father died. Though, by Connor's expression, it dawns on Arno that it was something he already knew. This strikes an emotion that Arno did not know he would even feel. Anger. Connor sought him out because he knew. He let Arno save him. when he knew. Connor would only state that he had already walked that path and he would not find nothing of mercy at his end. Arno doesn't hear him, however. He can even form words against Connor. No, his anger is for something else. It's the fact that he understands Shay. He knows the death of his father had been necessary, something he may have done had he seen half of what Shay had. But then why did that child that he saw talking to that little girl have to suffer for it? So he strikes out on his own, despite Connor's warnings. They may even tussle, with Arno wounding Connor out of anger. Arno makes off with haste, and we find ourselves at the end of sequence 10. With our help, Shay has rebuilt the order around him, meaning finding him won't come without difficulty. Sequence 11 would be spent searching for Shay, assassinating key lieutenants and gathering information, essentially undoing all of the work that you've put in. It would be reminiscent of the Versailles missions in Unity, where Arno had been disconnected from the order, but here he is still an assassin, just striking out on his own. Arno will have no companions for the entire sequence, and so the challenge is ramped up. Arno here also has a secondary motive. With the apple in the air, he means to find it. In the final moments of the sequence, Arno succeeds, but who else had followed him to the scene but his protege, Leon? He tries to convince Arno to take the apple back to the assassins, but Arno is not having it, believing that the apple would be safest with him. He can use the apple to root out and defeat the Templars. If it stays with the Brotherhood, it risks falling into the wrong hands. Again, Leon attempts to take it by force, and what follows is a sad excuse for a boss battle. In fact, it's more like the boss is you. Leon is quick and technical, though he struggles to follow through with any real attacks. Arno tries to put him down quickly, but Leon keeps getting up. He keeps resisting. Leon knows that if he keeps trying, eventually Arno will wear down and they can continue on as normal. However, Arno, falling down the same path as his own mentor had once did, pulls out the apple and uses it to force Leon into submission. You leave him there and set out to find Shay. You know, it would be poetic to place Shay in Versailles. The place where he killed Arno's father is where he makes his final stand against Arno. However, it would be too on the nose, and I think it needs to be something grander. I thought of something like the Bastille, however, that surely would have been a ruin at this point in which the story is taking place. However, with Arno in possession of the apple, I do think the natural course of action for Shay is to straight book it out of the country. And so the final sequence of missions takes place in the land where Shay is at his strongest, America. So at this point in the story, Arno is tired. At the beginning, I described how his mental state would worsen after Unity, and I imagine he spent the majority of this game ignoring it as well. He's been putting his all into upholding the creed with nothing to really show for it. So we could have a very disillusioned Arno solely focused on completing his mission. I don't think he has any vengeance in mind for Shay. He just needs to end this conflict over the apple. Finish the story, if that makes sense. He can't rely on the Brotherhood with how useless they've proven to be. The power of the apple will be enough. Arno arrives in pursuit of Shay in a foreign land he has no claim to. However, his skills carry him forward and he begins to cripple Shay's operations. Assumingly, they probably take place in New York City, because you know that's where his descendant ends up. With the apple in tow, there aren't many who can actually stand up to Arno at this rate, so he finally confronts Shay in a bloody battle, the culmination of everything built up in the past games. Arno strides up to Shay's compound, surrounded by Templar agents on all sides. They all have him marked in their sights, and when given the word, they fire. Arno is flung to his knees, riddled with holes. However, the illusion of the apple quickly fades as an onslaught of Arno's clones tear apart Shay's battalion. He slips by the rest of them with ease and makes his way to Shay along with his inner guard. Using a combination of illusions and skill, he quickly turns the ensuing fight to his advantage. However, Arno had not foreseen that the French assassins had followed him all the way to the Americas. Connor arrives with key French assassins in tow along with Leon, and the final battle begins. They easily dispatch of the confused Templars waiting outside, and they catch Arno in the midst of his battle with Shay. With Arno distracted, Shay manages to escape while signaling for reinforcements. The Templars surround the assassins in a pincer movement, decimating most of the French assassins, with Leon ending up severely wounded. Arno is quick to react, using the power of the apple to swiftly counteract this maneuver. The Templars are powerless to do anything. Now Arno has to make a choice. With Shay escaping and Leon hurt, who does he pick? He picks Shay, giving him his final chase. Connor stays behind to tend to the wounded. The chase is dramatic with high stakes. Throughout it, Shay will speak to Arno, attempting to reason with him. Arno has hold of Shay's memories. He knows what they must do, and they can do it together. Shay is an old man now. With his death, the scramble for the Isu artifacts will begin anew, and the world will shudder once again, but Arno is only silent. Arno gains ground multiple times, with the assassinate button prompting you to attack. However, each attempt is just a near miss as Shay narrowly escapes death every single time. Eventually, age catches up, and there's nowhere left to run. Shay is cornered at the edge of a rooftop overlooking the city. Or perhaps a cliffside would be more poignant. Either way, Shay talks to Arno. "You saw it," he says, drawing his breath. "You saw that day in Lisbon. How many more like it until the assassins learn? How many more people must die, Arno? I know you understand. Give me the apple and we shall put all of this behind us." He reaches out his hand and Arno stares at it. "And what then? I joined the Templars. How many people died under the rigid order you worship? It was not the Templars I betrayed the assassins for. They offered the opportunity. I did it for duty. I care only to protect what man deems themselves entitled to. The world is what is important. We can do that together." Arno gives pause, and Shay continues. "A new order, Arno. Not one born of assassin nor Templar ideologies. The world must never know of this power. It will destroy us." Shay then stands with poise and elegance, even at the end. But it seems to Arno that through his words, Shay is almost pleading for his life. At the very end, even such a feared man can seem so weak. "It is not our duty to dictate what the world wants," Shay cuts in. "It is our duty to protect it," Arno retorts. "By betraying everyone we know?" Shay clenches his jaw. He's heard these words before. "That is not the way. We cannot force history. Man will always find cause for conflict, to harm and destroy. This mission you speak of, it is not for us to complete. We leave enough for the next of us to go on. The apple will return to where it belongs, with neither Templar nor assassin. If it remains untouched, that is for history to decide. If my life, my memories haven't convinced you, then so be it. Avenge your father, boy, and let man destroy themselves." Shay says this with a cool gaze. He struggles as his legs then give out, and he is forced to his knees, his final act of rebellion. Arno stares down Shay. From out behind him steps the shattered visages of those Shay had once called friend. Arno seems to take note of them as they pass him, and they stand above Shay, who views them intently. His face winces with pain. "My father did not live long enough for me to truly know him, though I know vengeance would be the last thing he would want." Arno shook his head. "No, Shay, you brought yourself here. Every decision, every mistake and loss and victory paved the way for this moment. The very day you consorted with the Templars marked your path, with nobody to blame but yourself. There is true strength in the creed. Had you known that, perhaps it would have been a mentor of the Brotherhood who stood before me, one I imagine with quite the story to tell. Yet my eyes show me a broken man, struggling to pick up the pieces, falling around him. The two men stare at each other. All your ghosts, did they deserve to die? Shay has no answer. Essentially, in this moment, I want Arno to completely dismantle Shay's whole ideology, because if he was truly so noble, he wouldn't have joined the Templars, because we know what the Templars go on to do in the colonies. But I will discuss this more in depth later. I hope my dramatization gave the effect I was trying to portray here. Connor soon arrives to witness the scene. He puts a hand on Arno's shoulder. Arno gives Connor a nod and then just leaves Shay to his fate. I knew I recognized you, the boy that Achilles took in, Shay says as Connor approaches, and Connor only nods. His blade retracts and Shay closes his eyes. The scene then reconstructs, leaving both in a white box. Shay lowers his head. How was he? Towards the end, you would not have recognized the man I knew as Achilles. I think he never truly recovered from that time. Do you also think my words could have reached Achilles? You knew him. Would he have listened? I saw how regret ate away at him. I feel there's no use thinking of what could have been. What's done is done. He is dead, and you led the life that you chose. I see, he says. The wound appears on Shay's chest. He clutches it, and it deepens into a dark red. His breath labors. At my age, all one can do is reflect. The world that I knew is long gone. Connor eases Shay onto the floor. His breathing slows. I spent so long trying to protect it, only for it to pass me by. I won't deny your noble intentions, however misguided they were. Arno intends to carry on your purpose in a better way. Shay nods. He will right my wrongs. His eyes begin to close, but Shay uses the last of his strength to clutch Connor's wrist. Perhaps I will see Achilles once again. This time, will. Shay falls limp. The rest of his sentence is a breathless rasp. His eyes close only partially as he draws his final breath. Connor closes his eyes and speaks in his mother tongue. Connor finally ends his mission, executing his final target. And so, it means he will return to the Americas, which I just realized. I said that he will return to the Americas, but he's already here, so he's just gonna go home. He commends Arno, then imparts a final wisdom. They say goodbye. The epilogue sees you sneaking onto the island of St. Helena, the location of Napoleon's second exile. Here they shall speak for a final time. It begins mundanely. Napoleon explains what life is like in exile. It appears much like two old friends catching up after a long time. No ideals, beliefs or creeds of any kind to get in the way. They can just talk. Arno then confronts the obvious. The fact that Napoleon is in exile, he lost the war. To which Napoleon seems to just shrug it off. He says, with my liberty lost, my power faded and my legacy tarnished, make no mistake about it, dear friend. I would do it all again, but win this time. Roll credits. There's actually enough to say. After the credits, the second half of the epilogue, which is due to be much longer, will deal with the end of the Napoleonic Wars, particularly the Treaty of Paris, which was signed on the 20th of November 1815, and also the Congress of Vienna. I want Arno to have a phantom hand in these negotiations, going over them whilst also reflecting on the events of the game. When Arno returns to Paris, he will witness the events that led to the restoration of the monarchy in France. All the turbulent events of the last couple decades seemingly undone in one swift move. The monarchy introduces a shiny new puppet for the Templars to control. The wheel of history continues to spin with a cycle that continues forever. All in all, this seems to be much of an empty victory for Arno Dorian, and the game ends on this note, leaving us with somewhat of a cliffhanger. It leaves room to give Arno a sequel, but also enough of a definite ending to close the chapter on this era of Assassin's Creed forever. My writing is by no means the best, fanfiction tier at best. But the idea is to hopefully usher Arno into his own character, a passing of the torch from more beloved characters, and then Arno symbolically passing the torch on to future protagonists of the series. Originally I had the idea of killing Arno off. I mean, that was the original scene that I had pictured in my mind. A final stand with Arno succumbing to his injuries. However, through me trying to then connect the dots of all these characters and games into one story, it left no room for me to actually plant those seeds that will eventually lead to his death, and it would probably make the video way longer. By the end of writing this entire thing, it no longer made sense for Arno to die, and that's the way things go. However, I still do feel like I didn't give Arno any type of proper ending. Sometimes it's hard to express ideas, but this is what I was thinking. Arno throughout the entire game expresses the idea of history repeating itself, being a cycle. If he kills Napoleon, what if another Napoleon arises? And then at the end of the game, his beliefs are seen to be true with the direct restoration of the monarchy. But in a way, I think he's come to accept it. By forwarding the legacy of the creed, he can at least ensure that there is always someone there to oppose it. In any case, that is my proposal for the story of this supposed Assassin's Creed game. Obviously it won't impress everybody, but I tried to construct it based on what kind of foundations were laid in the previous games. The themes of order versus chaos that the games put a spotlight on. Also themes about war, the destructive capability of man. It's not the most put together story, and there are probably many inconsistencies and errors, but I think I did well with what I had. I toyed with the idea of making Shay more of a sinister, Darth Sidious type of character. You can see echoes with that inside of this story. The idea was that Shay had lived a life full of regrets, a very old man at this point, and so he would spend much of the game crafting Arno into this perfect killer, someone to replace his purpose and also bring an end to his life. Though I think that idea would be too edgy, and so I tried to embed it in softer ways. Ultimately, I think Shay would have lived to regret much of what he did, cause his whole ideology was kind of stupid. Altair similarly had to reform the order after it was led astray by what the hell, I just turned Arabic, Al-Mualim, yet he never turned on his convictions. Shay likes to blame the assassins a lot, but in a sense, I don't think he was ever truly a believer in the creed. If he was, he may have sought to reform it rather than murder all of his friends. Finally, we can talk about DLCs. So much potential for DLCs, but I would split it into 3 parts. Number 1 being Connor Kenway's life in the Americas. I'm not really sure of the events in America that he could do much in, but sprinkle in some homestead life, because, you know, he has a daughter around this time. Give us a proper send-off for this character at the end. The second one being Shay's memories. We could play as Arno witnessing Shay's memories as it happened in the story, because, you know, there is a big gap between when we see Shay in the Arctic and then get again in France before the French Revolution. We could do some heavy lore building with this, and then finally, to tie everything together in a neat bow, we'd play as Edward Kenway in London in the 3rd and final DLC. Think about it, if he didn't die, much of the events of Rogue and AC3 wouldn't actually happen. I think the idea of him being assassinated does wonders for Haytham's character, but give us that proper send-off that we deserve with this character. And then his DLC would also serve as a true ending to the entire Kenway saga, which now obviously includes Unity and Rogue. At this point you might be thinking, what would this game be called? Because I've been referring to it as Unity 2, but obviously it needs a better name. I feel like I've come up with a pack of potential names, except I kinda wanted to leave it up to you guys. Based on what I've discussed in this video, what do you think this game should be called? Personally, I think Assassin's Creed 7 works great, but yeah, you know, my ideas are trash anyway. All in all, I want to thank you all for watching if you did make it to the end of the video. Obviously, I am a small YouTuber. Feel free to critique me if there were any unnecessary parts. I've tried to shorten it as much as I can. Right now, as recording this, I've got 2 hours of audio footage, so Hopefully I can cut a lot of this out. But really and truly, this was just a bit of a fun project for me. I like connecting unnecessary dots, and attempting to connect the unused plots that Ubisoft set up was challenging and fun to do. The scene of Arno and Connor confronting this older version of Shay was something that I couldn't get out of my head. So perhaps with this 2-hour yap session, it will finally leave me and I can go do some other things. I've been your boy Polar. Peace.